The film begins with a plane crashing due to a failure in both the right and left engines. On board was the pilot, Captain Sully. He did everything he could to prevent the crash, but he failed. However, what we saw was only a dream. The director started with this scene to show us the possible consequence of Captain Sully making the wrong decision. But in reality, he didn't make that decision. He chose the right one. What was the right decision? In 2009, Cactus Flight 1549 was preparing for takeoff from LaGuardia Airport in New York, heading to Charlotte Airport in North Carolina, a domestic flight on an American airline. The plane was piloted by Captain Sully, a skilled and experienced aviator, assisted by Captain Jeff, along with flight attendants Sheila and Darlene. After completing all routine pre-flight procedures, Captain Sully decided to proceed with the journey, and the takeoff was successful. But just 1 minute after takeoff, an airborne incident occurred. A flock of birds collided with both engines. The right engine failed first, followed by the left engine seconds later. This caused a power outage on board, and the passengers began to panic. Captain Sully decided to activate the auxiliary power unit, restoring electricity to the aircraft. He then sent a distress call to air traffic control, informing them of the situation and the engine failures. Air traffic control responded by suggesting a return to LaGuardia Airport and provided a designated runway for landing. However, Captain Sully told them he wouldn't be able to reach it in time. The tower then proposed an alternative, landing at Teterboro Airport, but Captain Sully had already made his decision. He signaled to aircraft flying near the Hudson River to get a clear view of the area. A helicopter spotted the plane and confirmed visual contact, reporting that it was heading for an emergency landing. For air traffic control, this decision seemed like suicide. No one had ever attempted such a landing before. But on the other hand, Captain Sully had already committed to his plan, an emergency water landing on the Hudson River. And indeed, he successfully landed the aircraft safely on the water. However, water started seeping into the plane. Captain Sully immediately went to the passengers, instructing them to evacuate. The flight attendants calmly guided them toward the emergency exits to avoid panic or injuries. Meanwhile, air traffic control sent distress signals to all nearby boats and dispatched a Coast Guard helicopter for assistance. Within minutes, rescue teams arrived at the crash site, gaining full control of the situation. Every passenger was rescued, including those who had panicked and drifted away from the aircraft. While all the passengers were evacuating the plane, Captain Sully made sure personally that no one was left inside and that all passengers had exited safely. After confirming that all 155 passengers had been evacuated, Captain Sully was the last person to leave the aircraft. The first thing he did after exiting was call his wife, Lori, to reassure her. However, she was unaware of what had happened. He simply told her, "Turn on the TV and don't worry. I'm fine. Reassure the girls too." After that, Captain Sully's main concern was ensuring that every passenger had been rescued. However, this task wasn't easy, as the rescue boats had taken passengers to different locations. Some were brought to Manhattan, while others were taken to New Jersey, the two closest cities to the landing site. Shortly after, the final count of survivors was announced, and Captain Sully learned that he had saved all 155 passengers with no loss of life. He felt immense relief, as the safety of passengers is always a pilot's top priority. It might seem like just another rescue operation, but from that moment on, Sully became a hero in the eyes of everyone. From the flight crew to the passengers who publicly thanked him on television, and even the taxi driver who picked him up, taking the opportunity to call him a true hero. Captain Sully appeared on numerous television programs, where people regarded him as a national hero. Even talk show hosts and journalists saw him as one. But there was one entity that did not consider him a hero: the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB. From the start of the investigation, the lead investigator, Charles, was convinced that Captain Sully had made a mistake. He opened the hearing by saying, "We are beginning our investigation into the crash of Cactus 1549. Sully immediately corrected him. It wasn't a crash. It was an emergency landing. The questions continued. Why didn't you return to LaGuardia Airport, even though you told air traffic control you would? He responded, "I did initially intend to return, but after making the decision, I realized I wouldn't make it. The best option was landing on the Hudson River." They asked, "How did you come to that decision?" He replied, "I've been a professional pilot for 42 years with thousands of flights. I made my decision based on experience. But the board wasn't convinced. They pressed further. You said both the right and left engines were completely disabled, but our reports indicate that the left engine was still partially functional. It could have allowed you to return to LaGuardia or reach another airport. At that moment, Captain Jeff, Sully's co-pilot, stepped in. All right, let's have the engineers verify that precisely. The hearings continued until they reached the most critical point, the flight simulation tests. The NTSB conducted a simulation of Cactus 1549's flight under the exact same conditions, including altitude, speed, and timing. The results showed that the aircraft could have successfully returned to LaGuardia or even reached Teterboro Airport. Based on these findings, Captain Sully was accused of making the wrong decision and failing in his duty. At that point, Captain Sully requested to review the simulation data. However, the board refused to disclose it at that time, citing confidentiality. After that, there was a waiting period before the final hearing, a period that was incredibly difficult for Captain Sully. He began recalling the tough situations and near disasters he had survived throughout his career. After 42 years as both a civilian and military pilot, his entire professional history was now at risk of being destroyed due to a single decision made by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB. If negligence was proven, he would be dismissed from his job without any financial compensation and would never be allowed to work as a pilot again. This would make things even more complicated for him and his wife, Lori, especially since they were already facing financial difficulties. The final hearing was held in the presence of the press and television cameras, making it a public session where nothing would be kept confidential. As the session began, a simulation was presented, demonstrating the plane successfully returning to LaGuardia Airport using the same data Captain Sully had at the time, including speed, altitude, wind direction, and the engine failures. The simulation successfully landed the plane at LaGuardia without any issues. Next, another simulation was conducted, this time attempting to land the plane at Teterboro Airport using different pilots, but the same conditions Sully had faced. Once again, the simulation successfully returned the plane to safety. At that moment, Captain Sully was no longer seen as a hero. Instead, he was portrayed as a reckless pilot who had unnecessarily ditched the plane and endangered the lives of the passengers. But Sully did not remain silent. With confidence, he said, "All right, let's talk seriously." This statement took everyone in the room by surprise. One of the committee members responded, "Were we joking?" Sully then explained his perspective. "I don't doubt the skill of the pilots who ran the simulation, but they knew in advance what was going to happen, when it would happen, and what course they needed to take. They weren't given any time to think and make decisions as I had to in a real-life emergency." The committee realized that Sully had a valid point. They decided to redo the simulation, but this time, they introduced a 35-second delay after the bird strike, representing the actual time Sully had spent assessing the situation before making his decision. When the simulation was rerun with this 35-second delay, the results were catastrophic. The plane failed to reach the runway at LaGuardia. The simulated landing at Teterboro, under the same conditions, also ended in failure. With this, Captain Sully proved that he had made the right decision and that returning to any airport had never been a safe option. Finally, the official report from aviation engineers on the condition of the left engine was released. It confirmed that the engine was completely disabled and that the initial report claiming it was still operational had been incorrect, as it was based on inaccurate data. With this revelation, Captain Sully was fully exonerated, proving that his decision had saved all 155 passengers. The film is based on a true story that took place in 2009, demonstrating how a hero can be turned into a suspect, solely because of theoretical numbers and data, without considering the human factor and real-life experience. If you love movies and movie recaps, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more. Hit like if you enjoyed the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.